benefit anyone who's watching from home, this area of the council chambers is considered to be part of the closed meeting that we will be conducting later on.
Perfect.
Morning, Councillor Kavanagh.
Morning, Caitlin. Oh, I'm not hearing you. Just a sec.
I'm on mute, that's why.
Oh, there you go.
It's not you, it's me.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Everything okay today?
So far, so good.
Good. We'll be over quick.
To everyone on the line, the stream is now live on YouTube.
Morning, gentlemen.
And Teresa. Good
Oh,
morning.
sorry, I didn't see Teresa jump on there. Morning, Teresa.
Members of the commission and council and staff who are on the line, please be reminded we will be streaming the open portion of this meeting on YouTube, and we have begun our live stream in advance of the meeting. Thank you.
So we'll get started in a minute here, folks, as soon as the clock turns 10. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's special meeting of the Transit Commission on June 10th, 2020. Before we proceed, I'd like to do a quick roll call of all 12 members to ensure we have quorum. Councillor Suds, are you there?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Gower, I see you.
Morning.
Councillor Kavanagh,
Here.
thank you. Councillor Tierney,
Good morning.
morning. Councillor McKenney. Councillor McKenney. Okay, Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Here, thank you. Commissioner Caracato. You're on mute. And Commissioner Olson,
Here.
thank you. Commissioner Williams,
Here.
thank you. Commissioner Wright Gilbert,
Good morning. Here.
morning. And Vice Chair Cluche.
Good morning here.
Great. So we're just missing Councillor McKenney. So before we move on, is there any declarations of interest? Okay, hearing none. Before we consider the motion to move in camera, I'm going to ask the city clerk to give a brief overview of the procedure for this meeting, which is the city's first ever virtual in-camera meeting. Mr. O'Connor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this. And as you've indicated, this is the first virtual in-camera or closed meeting the City of Ottawa has had, and I'm not aware of any other municipalities who have similarly undertaken this, but we'll go with it. What we will seek today, Mr. Chair, is to try to replicate what would actually happen during a regular or traditional closed meeting. And most members of the Transit Commission, certainly most members of Council, will recall that what normally occurs is there will be a motion to go in closed session. Once the motion carries, residents and members of the public and media, and indeed all of the technological staff, are ushered out of council chambers. The in-camera meeting takes place. There is then a motion to rise and report. Once the residents, the media, and the cameras are back on, you, Mr. Chair, would read a standard indication, a communication that we'll talk about momentarily, and then the meeting would usually adjourn. Having said all that, that is not what is going to take place today, and I want to make sure that the public and the media understand that once we go in camera, they may want to just leave Zoom entirely. So here's what we're going to do in a couple of minutes, Mr. Chair. The Transit Commission will resolve to move in closed section pursuant to the procedure bylaw, being subsection 13.1D, the labor relations or employee negotiations, and subsection 13.1F, being the receiving of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, with respect to receiving an update on the bargaining and the tentative collective agreement with the Amalgamated Transit Union, being Local 279. What members will probably recall, and some commissioners may or may not, Mr. Chair, is the fact that under the Municipal Act, when you go in closed session, members or bodies can only move procedural motions. You cannot move a substantive motion. On the recommendation of our IT security, we have been using Microsoft Teams. We will be using Microsoft Teams for the in-camera portion of the meeting. Members of the Transit Commission and various members of Council received an email yesterday afternoon from Ms. Carol Legault from my office containing the Teams meeting invitation. This email also includes instructions as well as a phone number to call if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. So after the Commission approves the motion to go in camera, members can leave the Zoom meeting and join the Microsoft Teams meeting. I would suggest for those viewers or the media watching right now, that's probably the time they'll want to disconnect for the reasons I'm about to explain. Again, Transit Commissioners and members, should you have any difficulty joining the meeting using Teams, you can also call in, use the phone number and the conference ID number provided on the invitation. Once the Commission is in camera and that portion of the meeting begins, roll call will be done once again to ensure that we have a quorum of the Commission and that the Clerk's office can identify all participants in the virtual meeting room for the purposes of our detailed minutes. At that point, Mr. David White and his labor relations team will present their views and their discussion with regards to the collective agreement. Following the in-camera presentation and questions, the commission will consider a procedural motion to refer the collective agreement matter to council to deal with later on this morning. The commission meeting, and here's the big change, Mr. Chair, the commission meeting will then move a motion to adjourn. We will still be in camera, so people will understand, members will understand, this is the unusual part, but because a procedural motion includes a motion to adjourn, and because we're taking the advice of our IT folks, members of the commission will then be adjourning the matter in camera. That will provide all members of council with the opportunity beginning at 10 a.m. or 20 minutes after the Transit Commission adjourns to go back onto the teleconference for the council meeting. So that's the little bit of difference here. So, Mr. Chair, you won't be rising and reporting. You won't be making your nice statement, which members of council will obviously remember that there's a public statement with regards to the fact that no substantive motions and only procedural motions or directions to staff were dealt with in closed session. That portion of the requirements will actually be dealt with, Mr. Chair, at your Transit Commission meeting on June 17th. So we want to be very clear with members of the public, the media, and members of both council and the Transit Commission. This meeting will end in camera in order to provide everyone with substantive time to move from various venues. Finally, Mr. Chair, it behooves me to remind Transit Commission commissioners and members of council that they are not to share publicly any information with respect to the confidential collective bargaining matters during or after the closed meeting this morning. The details of the collective agreement, should it ultimately be ratified by council, will be made public shortly thereafter. But for the purposes of both your procedure bylaw and your code of conduct, I'm required to remind members that there is that confidentiality which must be retained throughout the entire process. So, Mr. Chair, that ends my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. So I'll now ask our Vice Chair Cloutier to move the motion for us to go in camera, please.
Good morning, Chair and colleagues and commissioners. Be it resolved that in accordance with Procedure Bylaw 2019-8, the Transit Commission resolve in camera pursuant to subsection 13.1D, Labor Relations or Employee Negotiations, subsection 13.1F, for the receiving of the advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with respect to receiving an update on bargaining and the tentative collective agreement with the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 279, and be it further resolved that the Chair of the Transit Commission formally report out on the Transit Commission in-camera session at the regular Transit Commission meeting of June 17th, 2020.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So we'll now end the meeting in Zoom, have a 5-minute recess to allow everybody to join the in-camera meeting in Teams. And the clerk's office has provided the commissioners and members of council with the confidential meeting details and instructions. There's a phone number in there. If you run into any trouble, just call that number and they're going to help you connect. So we'll see you all in Microsoft